The battlefield of Vera was silent now, but silence did not mean peace. The war cries had ended, the weapons had fallen, yet the air still smelled of smoke, blood, and sorrow. Fires burned among the ruins, painting the sky with red and black. The ground was broken, scattered with shattered armor, and the fallen who would never rise again. In the center of this devastation stood the army of the alien king. They were victorious, but victory had not come without cost. Their great war banners still fluttered proudly in the wind, but the hearts of many warriors were heavy. They had fought bravely against the rebellion, yet what they carried back from the field was not only triumph, it was fear, grief, and uncertainty. And among them, lying on a broken slab of stone, was Princess Kalira, the alien king's only daughter. She was known across the empire as a spirit of fire, a young woman who never bowed to rules or tradition. Where her father demanded discipline, she answered with defiance. Where her people praised caution, she leaped forward into danger. Some admired her courage, others whispered that she was reckless. But all agreed on one truth: Kalira carried a heart that burned too brightly to be chained. It was that fire which had brought her to the battlefield. Against her father's orders, she had ridden at the front lines, leading her personal guard into the thickest of the fighting. She had laughed in the face of danger, her silver blade flashing under the alien sun. Her soldiers followed because she made them believe no defeat was possible. But even fire can be broken. Now, her once bright armor was cracked and torn. Her body lay motionless, her breathing shallow. Silver blood seeped from the deep wound across her side, pooling beneath her and sinking into the dirt. Her guards knelt beside her in despair, calling her name, pressing their hands against the wound, but their efforts were hopeless. No matter what they tried, her life slipped further away with every passing second. The alien king himself stood over her, and for the first time in decades, his expression was not stern command, but helpless fear. He had ruled countless worlds. He had crushed rebellions, silenced enemies, and stood tall as an unshakable symbol of strength. Yet now, he was only a father watching the light fade from his daughter's eyes. Save her. He ordered his generals, his healers, his sorcerers, whatever it takes, save her. But nothing worked. Their medicine was powerless against the damage. Their advanced tools failed. Even their strongest healers shook their heads in sorrow. The princess was slipping away, and with her, the king's heart shattered. The soldiers began to whisper. Some said it was punishment for her disobedience. Others said it was fate. A few dropped to their knees in despair, for they knew the empire would be lost without her fire. And then through the smoke, through the broken field of Bodhism, stepped forward. He was not an alien warrior. He was not a royal healer. He was a human. His name was Elias, a simple field medic, captured weeks before and kept alive only because he had skills that could treat wounds in ways unfamiliar to the alien race. To many of them, he was nothing but a fragile, pitiful creature, skin, weak muscles, no armor, no strength. They saw humans as lesser beings, barely more than insects. But Elias did not see himself as weak. Not now. When his eyes fell on the dying princess, he did not think of fear, or rank, or the wrath of the king. He saw only a patient, a life hanging by a thread, a spark that could still be saved if someone dared to try. Without waiting for permission, Elias pushed through the guards and knelt at her side. His hands opened the battered medical kit strapped to his chest. He looked at the wound, studied her strange silver blood, and already his mind raced with solutions. The alien generals roared in outrage. How dare this human touch the princess? They shouted. Remove him. But Elias did not stop. He pressed cloth to the wound, whispering words no one else understood. Not prayers, just the steady rhythm of comfort he always gave to his patients. His hands moved with calm determination, though inside his chest his heart thundered like a war drum. The alien king raised a hand, silencing his generals. His voice was low, trembling with desperation. "If she dies, nothing matters," he said. "Let him try." The soldiers stared in shock. The king had given permission. The human would be allowed to touch the royal bloodline. And so, Elias bent closer to the broken princess, his eyes burning with focus, his hands steady as stone. Around him, warriors watched with disbelief. None of them knew if a human could save her. But Elias knew only this: he would not let her die. Not while he still drew breath. The moment Elias placed his hands on Princess Kalira, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath. Warriors who had fought with fire in their veins now stood frozen, their eyes locked on the fragile human crouched over their dying princess. None of them trusted him. None of them believed in him. But still, he worked. Elias had been a field medic for years, moving from one war to another. He had patched up countless soldiers, both friends and strangers. He had seen every kind of wound, every kind of suffering. But this was different. He had never treated an alien royal, never seen blood that shimmered silver under the dying sun. Her body was unlike anything he had studied, and yet the truth was the same. Life was slipping away, and only his hands stood between her and death. He pulled cloth from his kit and pressed it firmly against the wound, ignoring the hiss of alien generals behind him. The bleeding slowed, but the princess's breathing was still shallow. Her chest rose in weak gasps, her lips pale. "Stay with me," Elias whispered, though he knew she could not hear. "You're not leaving. Not tonight." The generals paced, like caged beasts. One of them snarled, "This is madness. A human cannot save her. He does not understand her body, her blood, her spirit." But Elias kept working. He cleaned the wound with steady hands, wrapping her side with strips of cloth, improvising where alien tools failed him. His mind worked quickly, analyzing, adapting, inventing solutions where none had existed before. Every drop of silver blood felt like sand falling in an hourglass, reminding him how little time remained. The alien king himself loomed above, his shadow falling across both healer and daughter. His eyes were fire, but his hands were clenched tightly behind his back, forcing himself to wait. His army had conquered galaxies. His power was unmatched. But at this moment, his fate rested in the hands of a human prisoner. Elias reached for a small vial in his kit, a liquid meant for human blood loss. He hesitated for a heartbeat, knowing it might not work on her. But hesitation was death. He poured a measured drop onto her wound and watched. The alien skin hissed faintly, and then he saw ether. Edges of the torn flesh slowed their bleeding. It wasn't a cure, but it bought him precious time. The princess stirred faintly, her eyes flickering open for only a second. She looked at him, not at the generals, not at her father, but at Elias. Her lips moved, forming words in her native tongue. Elias didn't understand, but the sound of her voice filled him with fierce determination. She was still fighting. He bent lower, speaking softly, almost like a lullaby. "You're strong. You've fought battles I can't imagine. But you're not fighting this one alone. I'm here. Hold on to me." Hours passed like a lifetime. Elias's hands were covered in silver stains, his arms trembling from exhaustion, yet he refused to stop. Every heartbeat of hers felt like a fragile victory, every breath like a gift that could vanish. He stitched the wound carefully, layer by layer, whispering steady words all the while. The alien soldiers began to murmur. At first, their voices were sharp with doubt, but slowly, disbelief gave way to awe. The human, fragile, small, powerless, in battle was holding back death itself with nothing but skill and willpower. When the final stitch was done, Elias sat back, his chest heaving. He had given everything he could. He watched, praying silently, as the princess's breathing grew deeper, steadier. The rise and fall of her chest was weak, but it was life. Life, where there had been only darkness. The alien king stepped forward, his massive frame towering over Elias, his voice when it came, was rough and heavy. Is she saved? Elias wiped his brow, his hands shaking. She is alive. For now, she will need rest. She will need care. But yes, she lives. A sound swept through the alien ranks, a sound they had not expected. It was relief. Warriors, who had feared the loss of their princess, now exhaled as if a crushing weight had been lifted from their hearts. The alien king looked down at Elias for a long moment. No words of thanks left his lips, not yet. But in his eyes, something had shifted. For the first time, the alien king did not see a weak human. He saw a healer who had fought death itself and won, and beside him, his daughter breathed on. The spark of her fire was fragile, but it still burned. Night fell heavy over the battlefield, and yet Elias did not rest. The princess lay on a cot inside a hastily built shelter, her breathing shallow but steady. Torches flickered along the edges of the camp, casting long shadows across tired soldiers who watched silently. None dared speak loudly, for fear their voices might disturb her fragile hold on life. Elias sat beside her, his medical kit spread open like a soldier's weapons before battle. Every few moments, he checked her pulse, adjusted her bandages, and cleaned the wound again. His own body cried for rest, his eyes heavy, his hands trembling, but he would not leave her side. He knew that recovery was not only about stopping the bleeding, it was about protecting the spark of life until it had the strength to grow again. Princess Kalira stirred once in the long night. Her eyelids fluttered open, and she looked at the stranger sitting beside her. For a moment, confusion crossed her face. She was not used to seeing a human in her father's camp, let alone one tending to her wounds. Her lips parted, and she whispered in her native tongue. Elias did not understand the words, but he understood the tone, weak, yet stubborn, a plea not to let go. He leaned closer, speaking softly, his voice calm and steady. You're safe now, you're going to live. Just hold on. The words meant nothing to her ears, but something in his voice, the warmth, the certainty, reached her heart. Her gaze lingered on him for another moment before her eyes closed again. The alien generals watched from outside the tent. They were proud warriors, hardened by years of conquest, yet now they stood uncertain. None of them had expected the princess to survive this long. None had expected a human to keep her alive when their most skilled healers had failed. They whispered among themselves, torn between distrust and reluctant respect. But one thing was certain, without this human, their princess would already be dead. Elias continued through the night, working tirelessly. He prepared a strange mixture from his limited supply, salts and herbs, crushed into powder and mixed it with clean water. With care, he pressed the liquid against her lips, letting it drip slowly into her mouth. She swallowed weakly, and for the first time since the battle, a faint color returned to her face. When dawn broke, the first rays of light touched her skin, and Elias noticed something that made his chest tighten. The rhythm of her breathing was stronger now, still fragile, still weak, but no longer the gasps of someone standing on death's door. The alien king entered the shelter, his massive frame filling the doorway. He said nothing at first, only stood there watching. His eyes, usually sharp as blades, were heavy with something Elias recognized: fear, mixed with hope. Elias stood to meet him, his body stiff, but respectful. She's stable, he said, but she will need days, maybe weeks, before she can truly heal. I'll watch her. I won't leave her side. The king's gaze lowered to his daughter, then back to Elias. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then, with a voice like rumbling stone, the king spoke. Keep her alive, human, and anything you ask will be yours. Elias gave a small shake of his head. I don't want anything. I only want her to live. The king's jaw tightened, as though he did not know how to answer such words. In his world, everything had a price. Yet this human offered his skill, without demand. It unsettled him. It also earned him something far rarer than gold-respect. As the king left, Princess Kalira stirred again. This time, she did not whisper. In her tongue, she simply reached weakly toward Elias, her fingers brushing his arm as if to anchor herself to life. Elias caught her hand gently, holding it in his own. "It's all right," he said softly. "I'm here." She could not understand his words, but she understood the comfort. For the first time since she had fallen, her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. And so the night ended, and a fragile spark had returned. The fire inside the alien king's rebellious daughter was not gone. It burned weakly now, like an ember in the ashes. But with every breath, every heartbeat, every touch of the human medic's steady hands, it grew stronger, a fire that would soon rise again. Days turned into nights, and nights into days, but Elias never left the princess's side. He cared for her as gently as one might care for a child. Yet with the discipline of a soldier who knew every mistake could mean death, he changed her bandages, cleaned her wounds, fed her water drop by drop, and watched her breaths as if they were treasures. At first, Princess Kalira was too weak to speak. She lay still, listening to the strange human's quiet voice. He often spoke to her, even though he knew she did not understand his language. Simple words, soft tones, things like "you're safe," or "hold on," or "you're strong." She did not understand the meaning, but she felt the care behind them. By the fourth day, her strength began to return. She could sit upright with help, and her once pale skin glowed with a faint, healthy warmth. When her eyes opened fully, they no longer looked through Elias like he was invisible. They studied him, sharp and curious. "Human," she said weakly in her language. Her voice was raspy, but her pride remained unbroken. "Why? Why save me?" Elias paused, unsure of her words, but he guessed their meaning. He smiled faintly and placed a hand over his chest. "Because you're alive, and as long as you breathe, I'll fight for that breath." She frowned, not understanding the full sentence, but she caught one word: alive. Something in her chest stirred, for as long as she could remember. She had believed humans were fragile creatures, weak slaves, scattered across the stars. Her people called them soft, breakable things. They mocked their small bodies, their short lives, and yet, this human had pulled her back from death when all others had failed. Her heart, so used to rebelling against her father's rules, now rebelled against her own beliefs. That night, when the torches burned low, she asked again, "You risked your life for me, though you are not of my kind." "Why?" Elias looked at her steadily. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "A healer does not choose who is worth saving. Every life matters. Yours most of all because you still have so much fire left to burn." The princess blinked at him. His words, though broken in her understanding, carried weight. Fire. That was how she was often described, wild and untamable. For the first time, someone had not cursed her flame but honored it. She turned her head away quickly, as though hiding her thoughts, but inside, something shifted. The alien king visited often, standing silently at the edge of the tent. He rarely spoke, but his eyes softened each time he saw his daughter awake, her strength returning. The generals, however, were not so quiet. They muttered in anger, whispering that it was shameful for the princess to owe her life to a human. One evening, when Elias left briefly to wash his hands, Kalira heard two generals outside. "The king may allow it," one hissed, "but this is dangerous. If she grows close to him, it will shame us all." "Better she had died with honor," the other said bitterly, "than live because of a human's touch." Kalira's blood boiled. For all her weakness, she still had her spirit. When Elias returned, she clenched her fist and looked at him with new fire in her eyes. "They say you shame me," she whispered, "but I do not feel shame." Her hand trembled. Then slowly, she reached for his. Elias froze, surprised, but he gently held her fingers. His touch was steady, warm. He gave no grand speeches, no promises, just silent strength, and that was enough. That night Kalira could not sleep. She kept hearing the voices of her people calling humans weak, yet when she closed her eyes, she remembered the way Ilias's hands had not trembled, even when death hung above her. She remembered his soft words, his calm presence. For the first time in her life, she doubted everything she had been taught, and for the first time, she felt her heart rebelling not against her father, not against her people, but against the chains of her own beliefs. The days of recovery passed slowly, like a long march across endless deserts. Princess Kalira's strength grew each sunrise. Where once she could not lift her head, now she could walk a few steps with Ilias's arms steadying her. The camp whispered about her progress. Soldiers who had once mourned her death now bowed in awe when she passed. But with every step she took, another storm began to rise, this time not on the battlefield, but in the hearts of her people. The alien king, proud and unyielding, had not spoken much during those days. He visited quietly, watching his daughters' flame return, but his mind carried the weight of 1,000 doubts. The generals pressed him daily with demands. "My king," they growled, their voices sharp with anger. "The human must remain a prisoner. His kind is unworthy. To raise him higher is to shame us all. Release him, and you invite rebellion in your own court." Another warned. The king listened, but his silence was heavy. He knew the truth that his generals refused to admit. Without Elias, his daughter would be Ashdod inside her tent. Kalira heard the whispers too. Though weak, her spirit flared like a star. One night, when Elias changed her bandages, she clenched her jaw and spoke with fire in her tone. "They speak of you as if you are nothing," she said, "as if saving me is less than victory on the battlefield. It angers me." Elias only smiled. Faintly, "I've been called nothing before. It doesn't matter to me. It matters to me," she snapped, her silver eyes flashing. Then, softer, she added, "You gave me life when even my father's healers failed. No chain, no title, no law can erase that." Elias looked at her then, truly looked at her, and for a heartbeat he saw not a princess of a mighty empire, but simply a young woman who longed to be free of expectations. His voice was quiet when he answered, "Then let them speak. We'll show them what truth looks like." The following morning, the storm broke. The king summoned both Elias and Kalira to the great hall. Warriors lined the walls, their armor polished, their spears gleaming. Generals stood proud, their faces carved with disapproval. At the far end sat the alien king upon his throne, his presence heavy like a mountain. "Daughter," his deep voice rumbled, "you live because of this human. That is truth. But the truth brings us to a question we cannot ignore." Kalira stood tall, though her body still bore the memory of her wounds. Her chin lifted with pride. "Then speak it." The king's eyes swept across the hall. "The human is a prisoner of war. He belongs in chains. Yet he saved my blood, my heir. What place shall he hold among us now, prisoner or protector?" The hall erupted. Generals shouted for his imprisonment. Their voices echoing like thunder. Some demanded execution to protect honor. Others spat curses about human weakness. But, before the king could answer, Kalira stepped forward, her voice slicing through the chaos. "He is not my prisoner," she declared. "He is my healer, my protector, my choice." Gasps filled the chamber. The words were bolder than any blade. To elevate a human above alien warriors was unthinkable. The generals shouted louder, fury shaking their voices. But the king did not silence them at once. He stared at his daughter, his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable. For years she had disobeyed him, broken his commands, carved her own path. And now, here she was again, defying all tradition. Yet this time, it was not recklessness he saw. It was strength. At last, the king raised his hand, and silence fell. His voice was slow, weighted with power. You defy me, daughter. You defy your people. But you speak with the same fire that has always burned in you. If this is truly your will. He turned his gaze to Elias, who stood humbly at her side, silver stains still marking his hands. Then the human will remain, not as a prisoner, not as a slave, but under your protection. The hall shook with outrage, but the king's word was law. That night, as the torches burned low, Kalira sat beside Elias. Her voice was softer than it had ever been. You are no longer their prisoner, she whispered. You are mine. And though her words carried pride, there was no chain. In them, there was only choice and a bond that no tradition could break. The days after the king's decree were unlike any Elias had known. No longer was he watched like a prisoner, chained in silence. Now he walked the camp freely, though eyes still followed him wherever he went. Some were filled with anger, others with suspicion, and a few with awe. But the human did not care for their judgment. His duty was the same as it had always been: to heal, to protect, and to keep Princess Kalira alive. Under his care, her strength returned like spring after winter. Each day, she stood taller, her steps firmer, her fire brighter. Where once she had been pale and weak, now her silver eyes shone with life again. Sometimes Elias caught her watching him with an expression he could not name. It was not the fierce glare of a warrior, nor the cold gaze of royalty. It was something softer, something human. The soldiers whispered. The generals seethed. But no one could deny that the bond between them was growing stronger. One evening, the king summoned Elias alone to the throne chamber. The vast hall was lit by hundreds of torches, shadows dancing across stone walls carved with the history of their conquests. The alien king sat upon his throne, massive and unshaken, his gaze piercing through the silence. Elias bowed his head, slightly. You called for me. The king's deep voice filled the hall. Human, you saved my daughter when no one else could. You gave her back to me, though all believed her lost. For this, you have earned reward. Elias shook his head softly. His answer came without hesitation. I need no reward, your majesty. Her life, that is enough. The king studied him for a long moment, as if measuring the weight of those words. Gold, land, freedom. You refuse it all. I refuse, Elias said simply. A healer's duty is not for payment. I swore to protect life. If the princess still breathes, then I have all I could want. The king leaned back in his throne, his sharp features unreadable. Most who stood before him begged for wealth, begged for honor. But here stood a human, small, fragile, unarmed, who asked for nothing. You are a strange creature, the king said at last. Strange and dangerous. For a man who cannot be bought, cannot be controlled. At that moment, footsteps echoed. In the hall, Princess Kalira entered, her presence fierce, despite her healing wounds. Her eyes locked on Elias, then turned to her father. If he asks for nothing, she said firmly, then I will ask for him. The chamber stilled. The generals, standing guard, shifted uneasily. Whispers ran like fire among them. The princess's words were sharper than any blade, heavier than any stone. The king's gaze narrowed. Ask what you mean. Kalira walked forward, standing beside Elias with pride in her bearing. He saved me not once, but every day since. He risked his life with no promise of reward. He stood when even your greatest healers failed. You offered him gold, land, freedom, and he refused. Then I will speak where he will not. If there is to be a reward, let it be me. The hall erupted. Gasps, shouts, fury. Impossible. The generals thundered. A princess of the empire, bound to a human. This cannot be. But Kalira did not flinch. She turned to Elias, her fire blazing brighter than ever. You gave me life. Now I choose to give you mine. Elias's heart pounded. He had not asked for this. He had not dreamed of such a thing. But in her eyes he saw no jest, no game, no fleeting fancy. He saw truth. The king rose slowly from his throne, his towering form casting a shadow over them. Both. His voice was deep, thunderous, yet not cruel. Daughter, once again, you defy me. Once again, you follow your own path. And yet, he paused, looking at Elias, then back at her. Perhaps it is that same defiance that keeps you alive. The hall grew silent. The generals waited for him to crush her words, to deny her, but instead, the king gave a slow, heavy nod. If this is your choice, then so be it. The human shall not be prisoner. He shall not be servant. He shall stand at your side, by your will. Kalira's lips curved into the faintest smile, her hand brushing Elias's arm. And Elias, though overwhelmed, felt something he had never known before, place where he belonged. The true reward beyond imagination was not gold, not land, not even freedom. It was her. The decision of the alien king spread through the empire like wildfire. Some called it madness, others called it weakness, but no one could ignore it. A human, once a prisoner, now stood at the side of the rebellious princess. It was a story, whispered in barracks, sung in taverns, and debated in grand courts. For Elias, it felt unreal. Just weeks before, he had been a nameless medic, trapped in chains, expecting each day to be his last. Now, he walked beside Princess Kalira, not as a servant, not as a captive, but as someone chosen. He still carried his simple kit, still healed the wounded, but wherever he went, her shadow walked beside his. Kalira, too, had changed. She had always been fire-reckless, untamed, defiant, but now her fire burned with a new purpose. Her near-death had carved something deeper into her soul. She was no longer only her father's daughter or the empire's heir. She was someone who had looked into the eyes of death and seen a human's steady hands pull her back in the quiet nights. Away from soldiers and generals, she spoke openly to Elias. I thought strength meant only blades and war, she admitted. Once, her voice soft under the glow of alien stars. But you showed me another kind of strength. To fight death itself with nothing but your will. Elias smiled gently. I never wanted war. I only wanted to save lives. Maybe that is its own kind of battle. Her hand brushed his then, not as royalty to a subject, but as woman to man. And in that touch, both understood what words could not fully say, but not all hearts accepted. This bond, many warriors still grumbled in secret. Generals spat their anger behind closed doors. To them, Elias was an insult to their honor, a reminder that their greatest healers had failed where a fragile human had succeeded. One night, a group of soldiers confronted him outside the camp. Their voices were sharp, their eyes burning with pride. You don't belong here, human, one sneered. You think saving her once makes you our equal. You are nothing but weak flesh. Leave before the king regrets his mercy. Elias looked at them calmly. His hands did not reach for a weapon, he carried none. Instead, he lifted his chin. I never asked to be your equal. I never asked for honor or place. I saved her because I could, because no one else would. If that makes me weak to you, so be it. The soldiers were silenced not by fear, but by something they could not fight, truth. A man without pride could not be broken. They turned away, muttering curses, but deep down they knew he spoke from a strength they did not understand. When Princess Kalira learned of this, her anger flared hotter than flame. They dare threaten you, after all you've done, she hissed. But Elias only shook his head. Let them think what they will. I didn't save you for their approval. Her eyes softened then, her fire bending not to anger, but to something gentler. She touched his cheek and whispered, No, you saved me for me, and that was the truth neither army nor empire could erase. In time, The alien king too came to see it. He watched the bond between human and princess grow unshakable. He saw how his daughter, once wild with reckless pride, now stood stronger than ever with Elias at her side. And though he never spoke it aloud, he understood. The human had given him more than a healed daughter. He had given her reason, balance, and something the king himself could never give: freedom of the heart. Years later, when songs were sung of the war on Vera, the story of the alien king's rebellious daughter was told again and again. But always, it carried the same ending. Not gold, not land, not crowns or armies. The true reward beyond imagination was the bond between a fragile human medic and a princess of fire. He had saved her life, and in return, she gave him hers.